Cross-examination by defense attorney. Ready? Isn't it a fact, Mr. Frederick, that you wrote out a document in your own handwriting from which that document in front of you was typed? Possibly, yes. Well now, do you recall that you wrote a document of which this is a typewritten copy? You wrote one in your own handwriting, which has been verified by Linda Buckman. I didn't know it was going to be typed up. I wrote 3 or 4 of them. All right. You wrote 3 or 4 of them? Yes. When did you write them? Do you recall, sir? No, I don't. Do you recall whether it was before or after the date of this document? Well, to establish that, I would have to know what day Mr. Holcomb got out of jail on bail on the original charges. Counsel, do you want to stipulate that it was April 20? Just a moment. Yes, I will so stipulate. All right, it is stipulated that Mr. Holcomb was released on bail sometime on April 20, 1990. Now, with that in mind, when did you write the handwritten copy, the handwritten original of that document in front of you? The same day or probably the next day. In other words, April 20 or April 21? Yes. What happened to that original handwritten copy? Do you know? No. Did you take it? No. Where did you leave it, if you remember? If I didn't leave it in the typewriter, I threw it in the wastebasket. Well, I am not talking about, we are confused here, Mr. Frederick, and I don't want to do this deliberately because we are trying to get at the truth. I have been referring to a handwritten copy, you see. Handwritten copy? Yes, in other words, in your own penmanship or by pencil. We will get to the question of the typewritten one later on, but I mean your own penmanship? I don't recall, no. Incidentally, did my father give you any money? Yes, he did. How much? $80. Is that your signature? Wait a minute. Let me show it to Mr. Phillips. I am sorry. When did he give you the money? He gave me $40 on 2 different occasions. And do you recall what date he gave it to you? One date was when he had been down to Shreveport, Louisiana, to see Mr. Holcomb, and the next time was several days after that. Your Honor, may this be marked defendant's next in order for identification only? It will be marked defendant C for identification. Mr. Frederick, one more question and we will get on to some other matter. Do you recall whether or not you actually, whether you did or did not, in your own penmanship, write a document from which this typewritten copy was made? I might have, but I don't recall it. All right. Now, you mentioned when we were discussing it that you might have left one in a typewriter or threw it away. Is that correct? Yes. Now, I showed you, please, again, Mr. Phillips, forgive me. I show you, Mr. Frederick, a yellow piece of paper with some typewriting on it, and I ask you to look at that. Please examine it. Yes. Did you write this? Yes, I did. So we will take a recess at this time for 10 minutes. Proceed, counsel. Very well, Your Honor. Your Honor, I ask that the yellow sheet identified as being written by the witness, Frederick, be admitted for identification next in order for the defendants. It will be marked Defendant's Exhibit D for identification. Now, Mr. Frederick, I notice that Defendant's Exhibit D for identification bears no date. Now, I ask you to attempt to remember for me, if you can, when you wrote that. I was trying to recall that while I was reading it. I wrote a lot of these things on different occasions. I don't recall what I had on my mind when I wrote each particular one. Was this written before Mr. Holcomb was released from jail? On bail? Yes, it must have been. And after his arrest? Yes. Is this the truth? I would say all but the last 2 paragraphs. It is your statement now. Mr. Phillips, should we put a little mark on this as between ourselves before I ask the court to admit it, so that perhaps the witness should mark, all right, very well. I will give you a pencil, Mr. Frederick, a pen, and will you just put some kind of a mark around here so the jury will know if they ever see this thing that you now say these last 2 paragraphs aren't true? Yes, okay. Cross-examination by defense. Ready? Isn't it a fact, Mr. Frederick, that you wrote out a document in your own handwriting from which that document in front of you was typed? Possibly, yes. Oh, no. do you recall that you wrote a document of which this is a typewritten copy? You wrote one in your own handwriting, which has been verified by Linda Buckman. I didn't know it was going to be typed up. I wrote 3 or 4 of them. All right, you wrote 3 or 4 of them? Yes. When did you write them? Do you recall, sir? No, I don't. Do you recall whether it was before or after the date of this document? Well, to establish that, I would have to know what day Mr. Holcomb got out of jail on bail on the original charges. Counsel, do you want to stipulate that it was April 20? Just a moment. Yes, I will stipulate. All right, it is stipulated that Mr. Holcomb was released on bail sometime on April 20, 1990. Now, with that in mind, when did you write the handwritten copy, the handwritten original of that document in front of you? The same day or probably the next day? In other words, April 20 or April 21? Yes. What happened to that original handwritten copy? Do you know? No. Did you take it? No. Where did you leave it, if you remember? If I didn't leave it in the typewriter, I threw it in the wastebasket. Well, I am not talking about, we are confused here, Mr. Frederick. I don't want to do this deliberately because we are trying to get at the truth. I have been referring to a handwritten copy. You see? Handwritten copy? Yes, in other words, in your own penmanship or by pencil. We will get to the question of the typewritten one later on, but I mean, your own penmanship, I don't recall, no. Incidentally, did my father give you any money? Yes, he did. How much? $80. Is that your signature? Wait a minute. Let me show it to Mr. Phillips. I am sorry. When did he give you the money? He gave me $40 on 2 different occasions. And do you recall what date he gave it to you? One date was when he had been down to Shreveport, Louisiana, to see Mr. Holcomb, and the next time was several days after that. Your Honor, may this be marked at defendant's next in order for identification only? It will be marked at defendant C for identification. Mr. Frederick, one more question and we will get on to some other matter. Do you recall whether or not you whether you did or did not, in your own penmanship, write a document from which this typewritten copy was made? I might have, but I don't recall it. All right. Now, you mentioned when we were discussing it that you might have left one in a typewriter or threw it away. Is that correct? Yes. Now, I show you, please again, Mr. Phillips, forgive me. I show you, Mr. Frederick, a yellow piece of paper with some typewriting on it, and I ask you to look at that. Please examine it. Yes. Did you write this? Yes, I did. But we will take a recess at this time for 10 minutes. Proceed, counsel. Very well, Your Honor. Your Honor, I ask that the yellow sheet identified as being written by the witness, Frederick, be admitted for identification next in order for the defendants. It will be marked Defendant's Exhibit D for identification. Now, Mr. Frederick, I notice that Defendant's Exhibit D for identification bears no date. Now, I ask you to attempt to remember for me, if you can, when you wrote that. I was trying to recall that while I was reading it. I wrote a lot of these things on different occasions. I don't recall what I had on my mind when I wrote each particular one. Was this written before Mr. Holcomb was released from jail on bail? Yes, it must have been. And after his arrest? Yes. Is this the truth? I would say all but the last 2 paragraphs. It is your statement now. Mr. Phillips, should we put a little mark on this between ourselves before I ask the court to admit it, so that perhaps the witness should mark? All right, very well. I will give you a pencil, Mr. Frederick, a pen, and will you just put some kind of a mark around here so the jury will know, if they ever see this thing, that you now say these last 2 paragraphs aren't true? Yes, okay. Okay, one more time. Cross by defense. Isn't it a fact, Mr. Frederick, that you wrote out a document in your own handwriting from which that document in front of you was typed? Possibly, yes. Well, now, do you recall that you wrote a document of which this is a typewritten copy? You wrote one in your own handwriting which has been verified by Linda Buckman. I didn't know it was going to be typed up. I wrote 3 or 4 of them. All right. You wrote 3 or 4 of them? Yes. When did you write them? Do you recall, sir? No, I don't. And do you recall whether it was before or after the date of this document? Well, to establish that, I would have to know what day Mr. Holcomb got out of jail on bail on the original charges. Hey, counsel, do you want to stipulate that it was April 20? Just a moment. Yes, I will stipulate. All right. It is stipulated that Mr. Holcomb was released on bail sometime on April 20, 1990. Now, with that in mind, when did you write the handwritten copy, the handwritten original of that document in front of you, the same day or probably the next day? In other words, April 20 or April 21? Yes. What happened to that original handwritten copy? Do you know? No. Did you take it? No. Where did you leave it if you remember? If I didn't leave it in the typewriter, I threw it in the wastebasket. Well, I am not talking about, we are confused here, Mr. Frederick. I don't want to do this deliberately because we are trying to get out the truth. I have been referring to a handwritten copy. You see? Handwritten copy? Yes. In other words, in your own penmanship or by pencil. We will get to the question of the typewritten one later on. But I mean your own penmanship? I don't recall, no. Incidentally, did my father give you any money? Yes, he did. How much? $80. Is that your signature? Wait a minute. Let me show it to Mr. Phillips. I am sorry. When did he give you this money? He gave me $40 on 2 different occasions. And do you recall what date he gave it to you? One date was when he had been down to Shreveport, Louisiana to see Mr. Holcomb, and the next time was several days after that. Your Honor, may this be marked to defendants next in order for identification only? It will be marked to defendant C for identification. Mr. Frederick, one more question and we will get on to some other matter. Do you recall whether or not you actually, whether you did or did not, in your own penmanship, write a document from which this typewritten copy was made? I might have, but I don't recall it. All right. Now, you mentioned when we were discussing it that you might have left one in a typewriter or threw it away. Is that correct? Yes. Now, I showed you, please again, Mr. Phillips, forgive me. I show you, Mr. Frederick, a yellow piece of paper with some typewriting on it, and I asked you to look at that. Please examine it. Yes. Did you write this? Yes, I did. We will take a recess at this time for 10 minutes. Proceed, counsel. Very well, Your Honor. Your Honor, I ask that the yellow sheet identified as being written by the witness Frederick be admitted for identification next in order for the defendants. It will be marked to Defendant's Exhibit D for identification. Okay, here we go. 200, 4 boys, 15 minutes. Starts with question by defense. Ready? The reason he was stopped was because he was seen coming from the residence, which was under surveillance. Is that correct? Yes. Nobody, as far as you knew, nobody in your group of officers knew who he was. Isn't that right? It was my impression that they did know who he was. What do you mean, your impression? What was said? I got out there just the last part of the surveillance, and I was asked by, I guess it would have been Sturwalt, that we had to stop him. He told you to stop him? He was part of the stop. Did he convey any facts to you as to why this man was being stopped, other than he was just leaving that residence? No, but he was the person that resided there, that they had a search warrant, and we had a search warrant that was pending for that residence. Okay, but you have no authority and no arrest warrant. Is that correct? He wasn't arrested. You have no arrest warrant. Is that correct? That's correct. And as far as you knew, nobody was trying to get an arrest warrant for him. Is that right? That's correct. Okay, you say you were detaining him. Is that correct? I say I was stopping him and telling him I have got a search warrant for that residence. Did you detain him? Yes. He wasn't free to go any place, was he? Yes, he could have. He could have left you? Yes. And your officers, he could have just driven off if he wanted to? Yes. He couldn't, could he? Yes, he could have. Well, I thought you said they blocked his car off. Didn't one of the agents pull his car in front of Mr. Garcia's car? I'm not too sure if that's how he was stopped. I know he stopped at a red light and we got out of our vehicles. We approached him, told him we were police officers, and you had him get out of his car too, didn't you? Got out of his car. And that is I approached him and told him we have got a search warrant for your residence and he told me he lived there. You didn't have a search warrant and you knew one was not issued at that time. Is that correct? That's correct. What time is this that you stopped him? Oh, I would say it was in the afternoon, early afternoon, maybe between 1 and 2. 1 and 2 in the afternoon? Yes. And did you notify anybody that you had my client detained? Did I notify? No. And did somebody notify the people back at the office, say that Mr. Garcia was being detained? I am sure they did. I don't know who. Did you ever read the affidavit in support of the warrant? No, I haven't. May I approach the witness, Your Honor? Yes. You may catch his cold, too. What? You may catch his cold also. Oh, bear with me for just a second here. Page 17, A17, the one crossed out. This is a copy of the search warrant affidavit. And on page 17, and it says here that Mr. Garcia was observed at his residence there on the 30th, and that during this period of time, it says a male Latin matching the description of Manuel Garcia on the persons to be searched. He came out and he placed a cardboard box in a trunk of a Cadillac. You didn't see that, is that correct? I did not. Now, did somebody tell you that he had done that? I don't recall if I was told that. No. Now, this affidavit said that this Mr. Garcia had been detained pending authorization for a search by warrant. Now, that would seem to indicate that he was being detained prior to the completion of this paperwork. Is that correct? I would say that's correct, yes. It could hardly be otherwise. Is that true? That's true. Now, if the individual who was preparing this warrant left his office about 12 or 12:15 in Los Angeles, he would have had to have this information prior to his leaving his office if this was done there at the office, correct? That's correct. So that would mean the time that you detained Mr. Garcia was at least some few minutes earlier than that. True? Earlier than what? Then you saw him leaving his office. Yes. But when you went out there, no one gave you a description of anybody to be detained, right? Not me, no. So Mr. Garcia was not a person that you intended to arrest. Is that correct? Me personally, no. You didn't know anything about what he was supposed to be doing except he just came from that residence? That's right. If we assume that this detention happened somewhere around noon and the search took place around 3, that is 3 hours then, correct? That the suspect or the defendant, as it turned out to be, is held in detention? Your Honor, I will stipulate that is true, that from 12 to 3 o'clock, it was 3 hours. And that is what counsel wants. Do you recall, after stopping Mr. Garcia, somebody asking him to identify himself? Yes. Who did that? I did. Did you obtain his driver's license? I looked at it, yes. What did you do with the information you got from Mr. Garcia? I don't recall what I did with it. You had him standing out beside his car out in the curb, isn't that true? Yes. How long were you at that location? I don't know, maybe 20, 30 minutes. Wasn't it over an hour that you were out there beside the car? I'm not sure. I am saying maybe 20, 30 minutes as I recall. Do you recall Mr. Garcia trying to find out what you wanted with him? Why you had stopped him? Yes. And you wouldn't tell him, would you, why he was being stopped? That's not correct. I told him. How long after you had him stopped before you told him? Immediately. And you told him you were stopping him because somebody, your fellow officer, was in the process of attempting to get a search warrant from the residence, which he just left? That's correct. Do you recall it being quite hot that day? That's correct. And do you recall Mr. Garcia indicating to you or the other officers, whoever was there, that he was having trouble with his eyes? That's correct. And he wanted to get out of the light because it was bothering him? That's correct. Do you recall him wanting to go get a cold drink because of standing out in the heat for so long? Yes. And you wouldn't let him go get a drink, right? I went and got some. You wouldn't let him go. You went and got it, right? Yes. Why wouldn't you let him go? Well, I think at this point it is my understanding he was under arrest. Okay. You didn't do it yourself, or did you do it? No, I was part of the surveillance team that stopped him. I didn't specifically put him under arrest. It was my understanding that he was under arrest. He was under arrest? Yes. And why was he arrested? What cause was he arrested of? A violation of state narcotics laws? In what respect? What evidence did you have that he had violated? I didn't have any evidence personally. You didn't know anything about the deal, right? No. And yet you were part of the team that arrested him? That's correct. Nobody ever told you what this man that was being arrested had done? Violation of state narcotics laws. Okay. They didn't tell, that's a conclusion. A violation of a section, but in order to do that, you have to engage in certain kinds of unlawful conduct, acts, and do things, right? Not necessarily, no. Not for me to put somebody under arrest. Well, you mean you don't have to have any evidence of misconduct before you put somebody under arrest? I don't personally know. Well, if an officer calls up and says, I have got a warrant, arrest warrant for that guy, and tells you, you can rely that he has an arrest warrant, right? Yes. If he tells you that he has violated some state narcotics law, does that give you the right to arrest him? Sure it does, without finding out what this individual did. Excuse me just a second. Thank you, excuse me. So you don't require any factual statements at all, just you are able to arrest him if another fellow officer says he violated state narcotics laws. He says he violated state narcotics laws. Place him under arrest until I get there. Then I will place him under arrest. Did somebody tell you to do that? I believe Detective Hardin there. What is that? From Officer Hardin there. He told you that? Yes. Are you sure? Am I sure? Yeah, are you sure that he told you to arrest Manuel Garcia? It came through the police radio that he was under arrest and also the residence to be searched. A while ago, you said Detective Hardin told you to arrest him. Is that true? At this point, I am not exactly sure what was said. Nobody told you that Manuel Garcia had violated state narcotics laws, did they? You can't think of anybody that told you that? That is not true. Who told it to you? The information that I received when I got out there. Now the question is, who told you? Well, that is what I am trying to recall. I am trying to explain to you how everything went down. Now, the information that I received when I got out there that this individual was under investigation, that a search warrant was pending for the residence. And it was my understanding from talking to Detective Hardin and other officers that were out at the scene that there was sufficient evidence to believe that he was violating state narcotics laws and he was going to be placed under arrest. Okay, what evidence? Well, I don't know the evidence. You will have to talk to the case agent. Okay, nobody discussed with you any facts upon which probable cause could be based. Isn't that true? Yes, there was discussions as far as, what was it? The box that you mentioned that came out of the investigation that was going on. I don't know in detail about it, but I know. What did they tell you this man that came out of the house, what had he done? As I recall, it was something about being involved in the conspiracy of narcotics, and I take it for that. You are not even sure what was said. Isn't that true? I am sure of what was said. I don't recall all of what was said. Did somebody tell you his name, the individual driving this car away from that residence? I don't recall. You didn't even have his name, did you? I may have, I don't recall. And the fellow officers didn't have his name either, did they? They may have, I don't recall. You don't know, do you? I don't know whether they did or not. Well, wouldn't you remember if they had a name of a suspect to be arrested and that was him? Wouldn't you remember that? Not necessarily. You weren't looking for any individual. You were just told to surveil the occupant and to surveil the house. Isn't that true? I was told to go out there and join some other surveilling officers. You weren't told to arrest anybody, right? After he was detained, he was placed under arrest. Okay. But nobody told you to arrest him, did they? Yes, somebody told me. Are you the one that placed him under arrest then? Personally, I don't think I was. I may have. I don't recall. What did you know about this guy that was driving that car when you arrested him? What had he done wrong? I knew that he was involved in an illegal narcotics transaction or violation of illegal state narcotics laws. That's all I knew. You didn't know any facts? No facts. He was alleged to have violated state narcotics laws, that's correct. And so it ended up, you arrested him and you took him back to his house, right? He asked to go back to his house. He wanted to get out of the heat, didn't he? That's true. And so you went to his house, right? Yes, okay. And you sat in there. First of all, you looked around a little bit, didn't you? Like for people or, wouldn't you go in for a preliminary look-see to see if there is, any co-defendants or people in there that could harm you or something like that? Your fellow officers, you looked around, right? Yes. Kind of a walkthrough? Yes. Okay. You have done that and then you just sat, right? Yes. And from the time you started out with him until the time that you got word that a search warrant was granted, about 3 hours passed. I am guessing, yes, it was 3 hours roughly. All right. How many other agents were with you? Detectives or DEA guys? As I recall, there was another DEA agent who I can't recall. Was there more than one DEA agent? There was Sturwalt, an LAPD officer. Now, there may have been another DEA agent. And you think there might have been 3 other guys besides you? There may have, yes. Now, you are pretty certain that nobody had an arrest warrant for Mr. Garcia, right? It was my understanding that there was not an arrest warrant. Did you even know when you stopped this individual? Did you even know who you were going to be stopping? I didn't. As far as you knew, the other guys didn't either. Is that true? Objection. Calls for conclusion. Sustained. Did anybody tell you they knew the identity of the driver of that car? Sturwalt. Sturwalt didn't tell you. He knew who the driver was, did he? Yes. I beg your pardon? Yes. When did he tell you that? I arrived out there at the location. He briefed me. What did he say when he briefed you? That the individual that is in the house, now we have a search warrant for the residence, and he is driving such and such vehicle. I think it was a Cadillac at the time. That there was a Cadillac right there in front of the house, yes? I didn't go by the front of the house until after we returned. Sturwalt hadn't made contact with the man at the house that drove the car away, right? He was surveilling only? I don't understand that question. Had he gone up and made contact with the guy that you stopped, my client, prior to the stop? Objection. Ambiguous. Yeah. I mean, anytime prior to the time he left the residence in the car. Had Sturwalt gone? I don't know. Did he tell you he had? He did not tell me. And did he tell you he knew who that guy was? His name was? No. He didn't give me a name. He gave me a description of him. Description you could get from seeing somebody walking out in the front yard, right? True. And did he tell you he had ever seen that individual before that day? Before he saw him in the front yard that day? I don't know if he did or not. As far as you knew, nobody in your department had ever set eyes on that guy who came out and drove the car off prior to September 30. Isn't that true? No, I don't know what date